Setting the stage for your Georgia Saturday, this is DawgNation GameDay, live from Jittery Joe's in Athens. Brought to you by R.S. Andrews, Kroger, Pella Windows and Doors, Cercheros, Lassiter Tractor, White's Pools, the UGA Bookstore, and Jittery Joe's Coffee. Now here's your host, Kaylee Mansell.
I begin today's show with a very important message for you, DawgNation. Everyone say happy birthday to Sanford Stadium. I just learned minutes before the show. It is the 95th birthday of Sanford Stadium. DawgNation, welcome to the GameDay Show. I am Kaylee Mansell, and today it is Bulldog versus Bulldog in Sanford Stadium. Now, at the beginning of the season, with Texas on the schedule, Alabama on the schedule, Ole Miss on the schedule, perhaps this was a game that maybe the rest of DawgNation overlooked. But after Alabama and Tennessee completely fumbled the bag last week, this is certainly a game that gets a lot more interesting. Upsets have been a huge topic of conversation all week long, not just on DawgNation, but across all of college football. But perhaps the thing that we'll most be watching out for today is the home game atmosphere. You've heard it all week long. Kirby called out the fans not one time, not two times, but multiple times in light of last week's atmosphere maybe not hitting the mark for Kirby Smart. Today is a day in which DawgNation can prove that they can rise to the occasion and meet the challenge that Kirby has put out to the fans. So let's go ahead and get started with today's Game Day Show. This is what we've got going on. Here in just a moment, former UGA star Davin Bellamy is going to join the show, and we're going to discuss how much does home atmosphere really have an impact on the game, as well as an update on the defense. Then, of course, we're going to have Centel's Intel, where I sit down with Jeff Centel. He's going to tell you all the recruits on the scene today, including another birthday for the five-star defensive lineman Elijah Griffin, who chose to spend his birthday today visiting the Dogs. And then we'll have our impact players. Going to see the Dog Walk. Brandon Adams will join us then. And then we will wrap up with Connor Riley to talk about the offense and get a final availability report. But let's start with this. Today is a day in which the fans can prove themselves. I see both sides of this argument. Do I think the fans can be better in the stadium? Absolutely, but it can always be better. However, I also do see the point that the fans are making, that when you're not having those explosive plays, when you're not having that exciting of an offense, yeah, tempo is going to be down a little bit, but from the fan perspective, I do think that when the other team's out there, you can be a little bit louder and make it more difficult, because as we've seen at Arkansas and at Vanderbilt, that home crowd really can be the difference in the game. We'll see if those can rise to the occasion today. But in case you missed it this week, this is what Kirby Smart had to say on the fans last week against Auburn.
If you take pride in your performance, which I hope our team takes pride in their performance each week, then you worry about what you can control. And our players, have an opponent to play, and we're trying to make it harder on the opponent to play in our environment. And, just simple ask question, did we make it hard on them to play in that game? I don't know. But the pride and performance that our fans take, that our programming takes, that our Josh Brooks and his staff take, and our players take, it's a collective effort.
As he says there, it is a collective effort. I do think it involves just as much as the players and the team and the coaching staff, but also the fans to be in unison, because when we come back from the stretch of going to Texas, we're going to host Tennessee at home. Tennessee on the come up right now, even despite the loss to Arkansas last week. So we got to get these things sorted out before UGA hosts another major home game in Sanford Stadium. That will be here before we know it. Now, this is the other point I would like to make before we let Davin Bellamy come on and tell us his thoughts. But in doing prep and doing research for the show, there's this topic that always keeps coming up. And each week I think it's going to get a little bit better. I do think that there was some progression last week, but this is the week you've got to do it. And that's specifically regarding the Georgia running game. They brought in Trevor Etienne from Florida in the offseason, and that was one of the top portal pickups. And you think with a guy like that, between him, Branson Robinson, Cash Jones, and even the true freshman Nate Frazier, that RBU could potentially be back, but when you look at Georgia's numbers, I don't know if you can necessarily call yourself RBU in this case. Let's show you this on the screen right here. I put it all together. UGA is in the bottom category for almost all aspects of the run game in the SEC. You see it there. It starts with the rushing attempts. If you're not running the ball, you're not going to get those stats up. Only 144 rushing attempts on the year, which puts them 15th in the SEC, which second to last now that you add Texas and Oklahoma into the mix. Only 658 rushing yards on the year, 14th in the SEC, 8 rushing touchdowns, 11th in the SEC, 28.8 rushing attempts per game. Again, 15th in the SEC, and last you have 131.6 rushing yards per game. Carson Beck needs all the help that he can get when it comes to the run game, especially as you inch closer and closer to Texas. You're going to have to be able to balance the pass game and the run game. But here's the good news. Mississippi State could potentially be the worst team in the SEC. We've got their defensive stats up here. We'll show them to you on the screen. We called it missing the mark. No pun intended. Capital MISS. So far this year, they're allowing 31.6 points per game, which is last in the SEC. 20 touchdowns on the year, also last in the SEC, allowing 213 rushing yards per game, last in the SEC. And then on the other side, they're also allowing 225 passing yards per game, which is 14th in the SEC. The point that we're trying to make here is that if you can't run the ball against Mississippi State, who's in the last in the SEC for rushing yards allowed and points allowed, then you're not going to be able to run the ball when you play teams like Texas, Ole Miss, and Tennessee. It's got to start now, and it doesn't have to come from one person. It doesn't have to just be Trevor Etienne. He looks like the guy right now because not only is he good on the ground, but good with those quick little passes from Carson Beck. But today, I do think that we are going to see Kirby try to utilize that more. Now, the stats are a little bit skewed because you can't run the ball at Alabama because you're down by so much. But the more you try to do it, the better those stats are going to be. So that's something I would like to see, not perfected, but there needs to be improvement on that side of the ball in today's game. So just a second, we're going to hear from Davin Bellamy, who's going to tell us what he thinks about the run game as well as Georgia's defense. But I do want to remind you guys that here, when we are in Athens, we are always located at the downtown location of Jittery Joe's. I already had my coffee this morning. You see we have the commemorative cans here that you could pick up here in store, or you could order them online. Even if you can't come today, there's tons of locations, not just around Athens. Make sure you check the Jittery Joe's website. Find the location that's closest to you. If you want to stop by, make sure you download the Jittery Joe's app so you can get your first drink for 10% off, and you also get to skip the line. And I'm telling y'all, when we were here last week, this place was packed. So that's definitely the way to go. You're going to want to come to the downtown Jittery Joe's location. We always broadcast 2 hours before the game starts. So with today being 4:15, we start at 2:15. We would love to see Dog Nation here. Come meet us. Come hang out. Give me your thoughts. Always willing to hear opinions and things that I can add into the show. And you can meet some really great people and have a great cup of coffee. So I want to go ahead and bring on the former UGA linebacker, Davin Bellamy. I've been so excited to talk to him all week, but I want to start with this, Davin. I'm sure that you just saw the graphics about how slow Georgia's run game is. Is that something that's going to be essential to this offense the further that they get in the season?
Most definitely, Kaylee. Georgia, we've always been bred off a great running game, physical, on the O-line, and then that sets up, our pass game. But lately, we're putting too much pressure on Carson Beck to make so many plays happen, especially when you're not running the ball well. You get yourself in those second and longs and third and longs, and now you're asking Carson Beck to do more than sometimes what you want him to do. So I definitely think Georgia's staple has always been the running game, and it's definitely something we need to fix.
Yeah, so today on the other side of the ball, we're going to see Mississippi State play a true freshman quarterback. Their starter got hurt at the beginning of the season. When you're the Georgia defense and you're playing against a true freshman quarterback, how do you attack the situation? Do you essentially let him beat himself, or do you just tear loose and hope that he freaks out?
Well, you have to understand that the Mississippi State head coaches, they understand that they're playing a young guy against a very great defense. So they're going to make the game as simple as possible for him. So going into it as a defensive player, you know you're going to get a lot of run game. They're not just going to spread it out first 2-3 downs and just let him try to pick you apart. He's not ready for that, especially playing a defense caliber like Georgia. So, of course, it's going to be a lot of the run game. And also, when you're playing a team that's, well, undermatched and also playing with a young quarterback, you have to worry about the trick plays, the reverse passes or the halfback passes, because they understand that they're not going to be able to methodically move the ball down the field on Georgia. So to create some explosive plays, like all teams need, that may have to come in a trick play.
So from your perspective, a player perspective, when you're playing one of those bottom tier teams, someone like Mississippi State, what's kind of the vibe the week before? How do you stay focused in when you know that this is a game that you're absolutely supposed to win?
Well, that's where the player versus the fan mindset comes in. I think those guys in the locker room know that this is the SEC, and I guarantee you, playing for Coach Smart, that he showed that Bama game to them this week. Just because you're more talented, than a team, that doesn't necessarily mean in this league, the SEC, that you're going to win. The SEC is the closest thing to professional football that we have. And some of the things that we say on Sundays is you can be beat any given Sunday. So on Saturdays, those guys aren't coming in thinking Mississippi State is last on the totem pole. They understand that any given Saturday playing in this league, you can be beat. And with also where it is in the schedule, next week we have Texas. This is a perfect trap game where players may look ahead to the bigger competition and playing on the road next week and forget about this team. But I guarantee you, a Coach Smart-led team, he's not letting that happen.
I think you bring up an interesting point that the SEC is now the closest thing in college football to the NFL, but I do believe that the 12-team playoff has certainly made it start becoming more like the NFL. Now, particularly with the upsets that we saw last week with Vanderbilt beating Alabama and Arkansas beating Tennessee, is this something that's a product of the new era of college football, or was this happening at the time that you were a player and maybe it's just kind of in the back of our heads now because we're focused on the present, or is it a product of this new age?
Well, the SEC has always been a tough conference to play in. I know for a fact Vanderbilt ruined one of my homecomings. So, and just being around the different coaches, even from the Mark Richt era to the Kirby Smart era, they never preach the message in the SEC that this is a down week, because all those coaches understand coaching to this conference, you have to bring it, So as the mindset, there is no down team in the SEC. And we saw that last week. The number one team, Bama, lost to Vanderbilt. And then you have the new thing with the NIL, and with schools being able to pay the quarterback, you're always a quarterback away, from having a great team. So with that NIL being, in the play, all teams away are just, 100,000 away from buying a good quarterback to compete.
Yeah, earlier this week, Kirby Smart was asked about the upsets, and one of the things that he said is that the margin of talent is now getting smaller and smaller because perhaps maybe the transfer portal is the equalizer, because they're able to go out and get things that'll help them in the short term, and you don't have to necessarily wait out the long run. Do you also believe this to be true? This is why we're seeing closer games and maybe the SEC is getting more competitive, is because the transfer portal is ultimately the equalizer between all these programs?
I definitely agree. And, when you start to talk about just how a football team is made up, you have a great defense, but in order to go far, you need a great quarterback. And that's kind of been a thing, in the SEC. If schools missed out on that top QB, those SEC schools, difficult of margin was always small. And now if you can go out and just buy you a quarterback to just plug and play with an already set defense and a set, culture, it makes for, some close games, which is what we're seeing.
So I want to get an update on the defense from you. I feel like they're getting a little bit healthier. We're getting some players back, but have you seen any major improvements from them? Are they headed in the right direction? Are they ready to play a team like Texas next week?
I think over the last 2 weeks, with Dawkins having, three tackle for losses and, 4 sacks in 2 weeks, it's kind of showing, that defense is starting to play up to the caliber where we expected to. During the Bama game, you didn't see a lot of explosive plays for us. You've seen a lot of explosive plays for them. But that comes, off your D-line to be able to create negative plays. And I think over the last 2 weeks, we're starting to see the D-line do that, and that's a recipe for success because Georgia likes to get very exotic on third downs. The only way that you can get exotic on third down and get after the passer is to get them in third and long, and the only way to do that is to create negative plays on first and second down. So I definitely think the last 2 weeks we're starting to see Georgia do a lot of that.
Yeah, and last week, one of the things that we talked about is that with Smile London out, who's still going to be out today, Raayan Wilson was someone that was going to have to step up in that position. What did you make of his performance last week? Is this someone that can handle the pressure with Smile being out?
Most definitely. We think of it as, everyone has their part to play. And as long as, when I was playing at Georgia, we understood that if we keep Raayan Smith clean, then he's going to make all the tackles. So that means the defensive tackle has to take on the double teams, and me and Lorenzo Carter have to box everything in. And we knew that, Raayan Smith will finish the job. Well, the same thing goes here. I think you've seen the linebacker play be better in the last couple of weeks because of the D-line play. Everything plays off each other. So with the D-line creating more of a toxic backfield and just creating negative plays, it allows those linebackers to play free. You don't get a linebacker playing well if the D-line doesn't. So with the D-line playing the way it has in the last 2 weeks, I expect the same out of Wilson.
So earlier this week, right after the Auburn game and even a few times after that, Kirby Smart called out the fans for maybe not bringing that energy that he perhaps hoped with. You want to have that home field advantage in the SEC. But as a player, how much does the fan noise really benefit you, or does it more so hurt the other team? Was Kirby Smart correct to call them out? Does it even really make a difference for you guys?
Most definitely. Everyone has a role, on the football team, kind of like I just explained. If the D-line doesn't play well, then your linebackers don't play well. If the pass rush isn't good, then the cornerbacks don't play well because, the quarterback can get the ball out. So everyone has a job, and the fans are called the 12th man for a reason. There are only 11 people on a football field, and that 12th man, the home team, you're our extra player on the field. And if you're not on the field, then your job is to make it most chaotic environment for that opposing team. You want it to feel like it's them against the world. And like I said before, me speaking as a D lineman, when the crowd noise is rocking on third down, that offense can't go off sound. They have to go off a solid count, and that causes the offensive line to react later than the defensive end can. So that causes sacks, and getting off the field on third down and getting the offensive ball. So just being that 12th, and I think fans have to understand that they are a part of the game. And if you're playing at a home game and there's no home field advantage, then what's the point of being there?
So looking ahead to next week, what are the things that Georgia needs to improve on today in order to help you feel more confident about this team going on the road to Austin, where that home field advantage is going to play a humongous part in the game?
Well, I definitely think the last time we saw Georgia on the road in a chaotic environment was against Bama, and we didn't fare out too well. So today I want to see us run the ball. Without a running game, it's hard to be successful on the road because you're putting so much pressure on your quarterback to perform in third and long situations when the crowd is going crazy. So I just want to see us dominate the line of scrimmage. I think we're talking about the running game a lot, but in order for Travis to get going, the line of scrimmage has to get going. And that's where I think we've been lacking this year is our line of scrimmage. So I want to see that point of attack, pushing guys off the ball and just being the bully up front that Georgia is. And that will show me if we're going to be successful on the road.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think the defensive line, you got to give them a little bit of grace because they have been so banged up this season, and now you need defensive linemen more than ever, not just at Georgia, but across college football as a whole. And I do think that the offensive line of scrimmage is what has surprised me the most. Now, Tate Ratledge is out, but they weren't even on the Joe Moore Award midseason watch list. I think for me, that's probably the group that I've been most surprised with their performance, and they're definitely going to have to step it up as the season goes on and you start playing those more competitive opponents.
No doubt. I mean, the recipe for success is our front seven on the offensive end and defensive end. You know, the defensive ends and the running backs and the receivers and the quarterbacks get all the love, but essentially those D tackles, offensive guards, and offensive tackles are the reason why we're in the national championship race every year, because without those guys, their names aren't in the paper. But when they consistently bully people on both sides of the ball, it makes all those other guys' job easier. And I just think that's what we haven't been ever since I seen the Kentucky game, is we haven't been the bullies up front like we normally are. We're getting back towards that, but we won't see the running game pick up until we're more bullies on the offensive side of the ball.
So I want to end our conversation a little bit differently than we usually do, because I think you already answered it. But today, as you're watching, I feel like games like this is when we maybe see somebody kind of break out of their shell or somebody have a stellar performance. Who's maybe a guy that you're looking out for today? Who on the Dawgs could potentially have one of those breakout performances?
You know what? It's going to sound like a cliche answer, but I think Kirby Smart, he definitely understands that in order to go the distance in the SEC, we have to get our running game going. And with a defense like this is the time to get it going. We all saw how Travis was at Florida, and that's a reason why we were excited that he was transferring in. Well, I think this is the game to where we get him going. Georgia has always had that bell cow of running back that no matter what, if you give them the ball, somehow, some way, they're going to make something happen. And that's what I'm used to seeing. I think that's what the Dawg fans are used to seeing. So it's going to sound like a cliche answer, but I want to see Travis get going today, because we're going to need him if we want to go on a long run in this tough SEC.
All right, Davin, I cannot wait to hear your follow-up after the game with Brandon Adams. Thank you for joining.
Always, Kaylee. Go Dawgs.
Right, and you can make sure to check out Davin Bellamy on the DawgNation post-game show with Brandon Adams. That always happens immediately after the game. If you have thoughts and opinions, you can call in and give your thoughts and also hear what Davin has to say after the game. All right, so as this is happening, we've also got Alabama and South Carolina on in the corner right there. And as of right now, it looks like Alabama could yet again be upset. I mean, no one in college football is safe anymore, not even the Dawgs. Now, do I think Kirby Smart lets losses like those happen? No. Whatever he preaches in that locker room, they've been able to pull out those upset-like games. But you have to think that with what happened last weekend with Tennessee and Alabama would put Kirby Smart on this high upset alert and maybe use that as motivation or use that to preach to his team in practice about this can happen any given week. Well, look, I was surprised to find out that wasn't the case. Kirby Smart isn't using these upsets as motivation. In fact, he's using something else. Here is Kirby Smart on midseason motivation.
We're really focusing on pride and performance this week. And we had a great analogy. Somebody sent me and said if they were doing a Netflix documentary on you this week, who would you want to watch it? And would they like approve? Would you send it to your parents? Would you send it to an NFL team if they did a Netflix documentary on your performance and your pride and how you practiced this week? And I was shocked. They must have all thought the Netflix documentary was on them today because they practiced as good as they have ever done. So just give them a little attention and they eat it up.
I have a feeling that's a sound that's going to stick around for a very long time. I would love to see a Dawgs Netflix duo collab. Don't think it's going to happen, but I see the overarching point here. It's like if all eyes were on you all the time, if people could evaluate your performance even when you're not on the cameras, would they feel like you're doing everything that you can to be the best team that you can possibly be? And I think it's refreshing that Kirby's not using this upset mentality as a way to get the other teams fired up. The players shouldn't have to be fired up based on what's happening to other teams. They should be fired up for each other and fired up for what's to come for the Dogs. Now, with the showdown against Texas looming next week, maybe this game could have been the one that Georgia overlooked. Well, not after what happened last week across the SEC at Vanderbilt and at Arkansas. The Dogs are well aware of the dangers that awaits every Saturday. Cody Chaffins has more.
For years, in order to get their teams up for a lesser opponent, coaches only needed to pop in the tape of Appalachian State upsetting Michigan in the Big House back in 2007. Well, there's new fodder for inspiration. Now after Vanderbilt toppled #1 Alabama and unranked Arkansas took down Tennessee. But before you go thinking Kirby Smart will have those games on a loop for his team this week, think again.
We don't rely on the motivation of others, and I don't know. I just don't think that's a great way to go about things.
But although Smart may not be showing it to his players, they know. Malachi Starks sat back and watched the Vandy upset last weekend.
It's always good to play an early game because you can go watch the games that's going on. I think after the game, I had got home and I rewatched it just because I wanted to see what was going on and what had happened. And I rewatched a bunch of other games too. It's funny to watch it because I can't really watch it as a fan anymore. I'm just it's kind of like I'm dissecting film all the time. But it's really cool just to sit back and watch it. And then you never want to underestimate anybody. Any team can win on any given Saturday, any given weekend. And I think if you come out with the right mindset and attack it, with the same mindset as you do every week, I think, the rest will take care of itself.
And he's not alone.
No, I like to catch up with the games for sure. Just watch, see what's going on around the country. I mean, I don't put too much thought into it, but I definitely love just sitting down and catching the game, watching some ball with my friends.
It's a competitive league, There's this whole league it's full of great teams.
So what about the other side of the equation? Does a Vanderbilt win over Alabama inspire a Mississippi State team, which has lost 4 in a row, to think that any given Saturday they can knock off one of the big boys? MSU coach Jeff Levy tamped down those comparisons quickly.
I think for us it's still about what we do with our time and how we practice, how we meet, how we walk through. That is, to me, what it's all about. And that is what will give us a chance to go play the best ball that we've played, is focusing on us and making sure we're doing everything we can, to be the best version of us Saturday at 3:15 in Athens. And that is, without a doubt, the goal.
So whether they're saying it or not, you better believe that every underdog wants to be the next example of what could happen. For DawgNation, I'm Cody Chapin.
Let us not forget that this is the same Mississippi State team that played competitively with Texas for 3 quarters. You can't count them out just yet. And here in just a little bit, we're going to bring in DawgNation insider Connor Riley, who's going to tell us how that happened and also provide us with the final availability report. But first, I sat down with Jeff Sentell earlier this week to talk about, from a recruit perspective, how much does home game atmosphere influence your decision, and also who are the big recruits on the scene today. Here is Sentell's intel.
Another home game in Sanford Stadium means recruits on the scene. But before we get to those, I want to ask you first about Kirby Smart calling out the home game atmosphere. From a recruit perspective, is the home crowd something that could potentially influence your decision in a school?
Well, I know this. They love it. And Kaylee, you got to remember, these kids have only seen Georgia like twice, 3 times. I think a lot of the people that feel like Georgia is not performing up to the standard are people that have been to 50 Georgia games and they see the same things over and over. I know when I talk to recruits, when I look in their eyes when they're in the West End Zone, Kaylee, when they go Georgia, Bulldog, I mean, they're kind of mesmerized by it. They absolutely love it. And the vibe in them in Athens, let's face it. Can I just say this honestly, Kaylee?
Sure.
The most coolest things to them in Athens are not what happens inside Sanford Stadium on a game day.
What happens outside?
Yeah, it's like outside the hedges, beyond the hedges, whatever you want to call it. But, it's whether they get to go into the locker room. Kirby's letting a lot of more prospects come into the locker room, both before and after the game, or when they're out with when they're out with their potential future teammates on a Bulldog Saturday night in Athens. I think those are the things that kind of their big takeaways in terms of being in Athens. Of course, they love the dog walk. They love how the fans are, and they love how everybody's turned up for the games. And, you know, without making this a huge thing, I mean, Kaylee, I always thought, you know how the Braves were so good for so long, and then everybody just kind of, oh, yeah, they're winning a division, or, oh, yeah, I always thought Georgia would never get that way simply because you only get 6-7 home games a year. And I still think the Dogs will be that way. But I just think, you know, they got to amp it up just a little bit more to kind of, I mean, let's face it. Now I'm going to catch a lot of backlash for this, but Baba O'Riley, I talked to a lot of recruits. I know a lot of donors, McGill Society. I know a lot of people love that song. Heck, even current players love that song. I remember Dylan Raiola told me he loved that song. Carson Beck has made comments about that song. I'm not saying anything about Baba O'Riley before the game, but there needs to be sort of a freshening of certain game day staples to make it more convenient to those recruits that are in the house. Because here's one thing you don't see. I remember a few years back, Georgia had its own in-house DJ, like they do at the Atlanta Hawks games, and I think that went away. But you don't see as much bobbing the head.
No, I'm pretty sure they still have an in-house DJ.
Well, they had a guy that I think he actually worked for the Hawks at the same time, and this was probably like 2018, 2017, something like that, before they made all these improvements to Sanford Stadium. And I do get the point where, you know, especially, you know, Georgia has so much more capabilities. Like, I don't know technically what they need to do with the lights and the LEDs to dim them and release them, but I think saving it for especially night games, which you don't usually get those in Sanford, where you don't use that. You know, again, I have the memory of being in Tuscaloosa and Bryant Denny fresh in my mind. They went overload on all their pyrotechnics and all their lights and their kind of sound spectacles, where it does look more like a concert. But folks, sporting events do look more like a concert these days, and I think Georgia could make some steps in that direction while still preserving its tradition and history.
Well, if there is one thing I can always appreciate on DawgNation GameDay, it is honesty for me. But let's talk visitors. We got a special birthday visitor. It's the 5-star defensive lineman Elijah Griffin's birthday today, and he chose to spend this very special day visiting Georgia. I think that says a lot.
Kaylee, when you were a teenager, I know it was just so many years ago when you were a teenager, but like, didn't you want to spend your birthday doing the one thing the one place you could absolutely want to be? Anywhere else? If there was anywhere else you wanted to be on your birthday and you had the ability to choose that, wouldn't that be cool? Well, that's Elijah Griffin, 5-star defensive tackle, #1 defensive tackle in the country, #1 prospect in the state of Georgia for this class, out of this state of Savannah, out of the 912, out of the Coastal Empire, Savannah Christian, Pooler, Georgia, where everything is cooler and Pooler. He's making his official visit to Athens this weekend. He's bringing all the friends and family in tow, and he wants to have himself a good old time, and I think that's going to happen.
All right, well, who else is going to be around him? Who are the recruits that DawgNation should be searching for on the scene?
So there's two. Again, folks, you got to look at this. Third home game of the year, really second home game of the year, because mostly 2027 and 2028s were coming to the Tennessee Tech games. So Auburn was a big home game this past weekend. This weekend is a big game. Another official visit from Chase Linton out of North Atlanta. Very impressive pass rusher, 6'4", 220 pounds. Georgia wants those lightning kind of fast players off the edge. It's a really smart kid, really dialed in really well. I think it's a big official visit for Georgia. Georgia identified him this summer, and even when he was still a Rutgers commitment, so they've continued to recruit him hard. This will be a key official visit for Chase Linton as well.
What about any 2026s?
Yeah, you're going to see, I think, you're going to see a lot of 2026s. Like, for instance, Kaylee, I can tell you this, I think. There's probably 8 2026s right now, Kaylee, that call Georgia their #1 school. And that's a lot right now for this type of year, where they're kind of openly saying Georgia is their #1 school. You have a lot of prospects that I think this is a good game where you can put a 2026 prospect get him in the first few rows of the West End Zone at Sanford Stadium and really make a really big impression. I think Jared Curtis will come back for the Tennessee game. Jontavius Wyman was there last week. You saw a lot of players like, Ryan Mosley out of Carrollton High School could be a defensive back, could be a wide receiver for Georgia. Georgia says he could do both. He feels like he would do both to play at the right school. Reports are coming out that he's ready to make his commitment sometime soon. So I think with the 2026 class, you're going to see there's so much great momentum right now, Kaylee, with the 2026, and maybe you might even see a guy. You might even see a guy or two that may show up on the commitment list in a couple months.
So I feel like at the beginning of the season, when you looked at Georgia's schedule as a whole and how difficult it was, Mississippi State was one of those games that was so easy to overlook. But now, in light of recent events, Alabama getting upset by Vanderbilt, Tennessee getting upset by Arkansas, suddenly this game has a little bit more meaning to it, or is a little bit more eye-catching. So when all is said and done today, what do you want to see out of the Dogs?
Yeah, it's definitely you want a visually appealing win. Well, listen, folks, you guys get too enamored with those go with the flow folks on DawgNation that watch point spreads and they make sure that they get it right or against the spread or picking with or against the spread. Listen, if Georgia won 30-0, they're not going to cover the spread, but I think that's a good eye candy win for the Dogs. Yeah. I am of the belief, Kaylee, that for a team to expend the resources, what it would take to win 45-0 or 55-10. That means you're going to have, some of your better players playing extended time, second half, third quarter, fourth quarter. I don't know if that's the best thing to do in this playoff era when some of these players are going to play 15, 16 games. So to me, I would rather, you want to ask me honestly what the best thing that can come out of this is Georgia wins handily. Does it cover the spread? Does it even matter if it's 40-10? Will it matter? Especially if one of those scores is in garbage time. I'll tell you what matters more is if a lot of first-team players for Georgia come out of this healthy and a lot of those second and third teamers get a lot of good reps.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Thanks, Jeff.
All right, and last week, in case you missed it, the 4-star running back Usanah Chroma out of Lee County committed to the G over Auburn and Florida State. And last night, look, I'm not even going to wait until we do Before the Hedges with Jeff Sentell and myself to do the viral plays. He looked ridiculous last night. In case you haven't been able to see his game, we want to show you some of his highlights here. I still stand by the fact that I've been covering high school football for 5 years, and this is one of the best players I have ever seen with my own eyes. It's like nobody can catch up to this man. Coming into last night's game, he had, I've got it right here. He came into last night's game with 79 carries for 635 yards on the season, which is 8 yards per attempt. He hit that 800 mark last night to improve their team to 7-0. I mean, guys, this is someone that is going to help the Dogs tremendously. Maybe not right off the bat. We talked about the run game hasn't necessarily been the same lately. Well, between him and Bo Walker, the Dogs are certainly going to have 2 more running backs to add to what's already going to be another stacked room next year. So wanted to make sure that y'all got the chance to see that. If you want to learn more about him, then check out last week's episode of Before the Hedges, brought to you by Kroger with myself and Jeff Sentell. So when we come back, we're going to do today's impact players. But first, this is DawgNation Game Day.
Nothing makes a house feel more like a home than quality windows. So trust the professionals at Pella Window and Door of Georgia. We'll equip your home with energy-efficient windows and doors just right for you. Schedule your free in-home, no-pressure consultation. Get product samples, installation options, and a free quote. Log on to PellaGA.com and visit our new Experience Center in Duluth. Tell them Brandon Adams sent you. Pella Window and Door of Georgia. Viewed to be the best.
There's never been a better time to put in a new luxury pool. From custom designed concrete and finishes, we can build the dream pool to turn your backyard into a vacation destination.
When my wife and I decided to get a swimming pool, we knew we had to go with the best at White's Pools. They made the process real simple for us. We got a chance to design exactly what we wanted. It was great for our family. We're enjoying it every day.
White's Pools has been the ultimate choice for thousands of homeowners in Atlanta. Visit us online and book your custom pool design today.
DawgNation GameDay is sponsored by Cercheros, Lassiter Tractor, White's Pools, and Jittery Joe's Coffee.
All right, DawgNation, why don't you say we go ahead and get into some impact players for today? This first one, I'm just going to continue to put him on here until I feel like he reaches that level or mark that we expected from him all season long, and that's going to be Trevor Etienne. And maybe it's not even just about Trevor Etienne. Maybe we just put the running back position for impact players, because I still feel like that's where we need to make the most impact. So had him last week. Right now averaging 5.7 yards per carry, which is actually down from last week, but in terms of yards per game, 75 yards per game, which is up from last week. And he has 3 touchdowns on the year, 2 of those coming against Auburn. So we see him getting a little bit better each week, but got to get him more carries. Now, it does help that he's also had multiple receptions on the year. So you can do a lot with Trevor Etienne, but more so the importance of this and putting him here is I just want to see that run game get a little bit better each week, because we're going to need them when we play at Texas next week. Next guy up is going to be Dillon Bell. With Colby Young being suspended indefinitely, the question now becomes, when you get in the red zone, who do you give the ball to? There's not another guy with the length or that you can replicate Colby Young's skill set, but in terms of pure connection with Carson Beck, I think it's very evident that Dillon Bell is his guy. They've been playing together for multiple years. We saw that connection budding last year, but it seems like this is the guy that Carson is most comfortable with, and I would say that he is probably the most reliable receiver on the team. So all these stats denote his receiving stats, because when you add the rushing stats, it obviously increases everything. But so far on the year, 18 receptions, 218 yards, 3 touchdowns. Maybe at this point in the season, we thought we would see more out of Dillon Bell, but I do believe that his reps and his meaningful snaps increase each week. And I do think that with Colby Young out for the time being, Dillon Bell becomes his guy. I still don't know if we have the answer question of who becomes the go-to guy now that Brock and Ladd are gone, but right now Dillon Bell seems like the closest thing to be that, and I do believe that he is the most consistent receiver out of the group. But perhaps maybe we see more of Lunkin Humphreys today, more of Lawson Lucky today, and as Connor Riley, who we're going to speak to in just a minute, told us on DawgNation at Large last week, he thinks Cash Jones might get some reps today. Now let's do our defensive player. We have not given very much love to Dan Jackson on this show, and I will purely admit that's my fault. He's tied for the leading tackler with C.J. Allen on the year, 26 tackles, 1.5 tackles for loss, 1 interception, and he had that blocked field goal. Keep in mind that this is someone who wasn't even a preferred walk-on. He came to Georgia, told Kirby Smart he wanted to try out for the team, and now look at him. He is one of the leaders on this defense, and he's been really impressive this season. I don't know where it comes from, but I do think that we are going to see some sort of defensive score today, whether that's a scoop and score or a pick six. And right now it looks like Dan Jackson could be the guy that does that. So I'm banking on a big game from Dan Jackson today, and moving forward, I promise you, DawgNation, we're going to continue to show a lot more love to Dan Jackson, because he certainly deserves it. All right. Earlier, Brandon Adams was on the scene, got a chance to look at the dog walk. Here is the first look at the players today for our Kroger Dog Walk.
Hello, DawgNation. I'm Brandon Adams. Welcome into Kroger's coverage of the dog walk as the Georgia Bulldogs are making their way in for an SEC battle against the Mississippi State Bulldogs. The Battle of the Bulldogs here today. Georgia on its way in right now. You see Arian Smith coming by. Xavier Truss, Georgia offensive lineman, rolling through. Chaz Chambliss making his way in. The Georgia Bulldogs against Mississippi State. Kirby Smart making the challenge earlier this week. Lawson Lucky coming in, making his challenge here this week for a big raucous environment. And the early look is that's certainly the feel here with fans gathered inside the stadium ready for all of this here today. Tight ends coach Todd Hartley coming by. Running back Cash Jones comes by. Georgia players working the rope line here. Strength coach Scott Sinclair comes through. Mikael Williams about to make his way through here there as well. Defensive lineman Christian Miller, an injury question last week, but not appearing on the availability report, leads you to believe that he's ready to go and are ready to play. Quarterback Gunnar Stockton coming by. Gunnar typically favors the ball cap with the suit look. Co-defense coordinator Glenn Schumann. Here's quarterback Carson Beck looking sharp as always. There's offensive line coach Stacy Searles. A lot of expectations of this Georgia offensive line as the season comes into its crucial stretch. Speaking of that offensive line, Dylan Fairchild coming by. You'll see the pin on Fairchild's coat. Georgia today playing in memory of Helinski's Hope, a organization that obviously raised awareness for suicide prevention. Offensive coordinator Mike Bobo is here. The Georgia Bulldogs continuing to file their way through. We will remind you that our dog walk coverage here is brought to you by Kroger. Of course, all your game day needs, Kroger's got you covered for all of that. Food on the grill, drinks there in the cooler, everything else. But in addition to that, don't forget to check out Kroger for your Halloween needs there as well. We're in the month of October, it means it's time to get stocked up. Decorations, candy, all the stuff to make Halloween great. You can find that there at your local Kroger. You can also find plenty of Georgia coverage today online at DawgNation there as well. On the website at DawgNation.com. Of course, after the game, we'll see you at the UGA bookstore for our DawgNation postgame show. As I said before, we appreciate Kroger making our dog walk coverage possible. And with that, Kaylee Mansell, we'll send it back to you on what is a beautiful afternoon here at Sanford Stadium.
And I just want to give a quick shout out to Brandon's wife and his children who stopped by Jittery Joe's earlier to come see us on the GameDay Show. Gina said that she's been helping out Brandon with some of his fashion commentary. And let me just say that it is certainly evidential as Brandon continues to get better at it each and every week. And let's bring in our favorite fashionista who doesn't wear jeans here on DawgNation GameDay, none other than Connor Riley. The final availability report for this game was just released. Smile Munden out for sure. Roderick Robinson out for sure. Tate Ratledge out for sure. Connor, it seems that Mikael Williams, Warren Brinson are off this list, but the questionable ones, Jared Wilson, Jordan Hall. I think for me, I'm ready to see Jordan Hall get in the game because we haven't seen him play at all yet, and you got to have Jordan Hall for Texas, in my opinion.
I don't know about having to have him for Texas. Again, he's missed so much time, but Georgia does get good news today in terms of where they are on the availability report. No Jared Wilson, no Jordan Hall, which means that they are available. So you would likely expect to see Jared Wilson starting at center for Georgia Day on that offensive line. And then we'll see what Georgia's able to get out of Jordan Hall. But with Hall healthy, this is really potentially the first time that they're going to have their full complement of defensive linemen going into a game this season. And as you allude to the Texas game on the horizon, they need as many disruptive players on that defensive line healthy as they can. So if they can get through this game and go into that Texas game with a full arsenal of defensive linemen, I think that's going to make things much, much easier for Georgia in what should be an awesome game.
So Smile Munden's injury went from unknown to now lower body. Do we have any specifics on what the Smile Munden injury is?
No, we do not. We asked Kirby about that this week. He just said we're hoping to get him back. We saw him walk on the field in pregame. He has a boot on his left foot. He had some crutches with him, but was not using those crutches at the moment. So it's a lower body injury. You know, who knows how long he'll be out? Who knows if it's a foot or an ankle and what it ultimately is. He has had foot injuries in the past that have limited his availability, specifically for much of last season. So we'll see what it looks like. But I obviously no Smile Munden today, and I'd be a little surprised at this point, just given the way this injury has been covered, if he is back for that Texas game next week.
All right, so with today being Sanford Stadium's 95th birthday and Kirby Smart calling out fans all week long, I'm curious as to what does the stadium atmosphere look like as of right now? Can you tell that the vibes are already better? Is Kirby right in calling out the fans? Do they have to bring it all in today's game?
Yeah, as far as the vibe, I think it's going to be more the same what we saw from last week. I don't think that there's, quote-unquote, as much juice as there would be for a home SEC game. Now, part of that is because this is a very poor Mississippi State team, and some of that is opponent-driven. I think that's part of the reason why Kirby was so vocal last week in an effort to try and get his team fired up for this week's game. But I think in terms of Kirby calling out the fans, Look, he wasn't totally wrong in what he was doing. And I say this carefully and knowing what it means by this, but it's starting to have some 2010 Alabama fan vibes where nothing is good enough. No result works for them. And in games that you should be psyched for, an Auburn game, for example, that is a rivalry game, to not have juice in an environment like that, I think does raise some concerns for Kirby Smart. And that's why you understand him challenging the fan base a week ago. I am sympathetic for this Georgia fan base in the sense that, look, it's not Georgia's fault that Auburn has become a doormat in this league and that Mississippi State is somehow even below them. But I think he wants to see that same sort of weekend out passion that Georgia fans brought earlier in his career, but that was just not here last week for a number of reasons. And based on, vibes downtown Athens last night, walking around earlier today, I just don't know if it's going to be, this raucous environment that Kirby Smart certainly hopes it would be.
Yeah, you mentioned Mississippi State being one of those bottom tier teams, if not the bottom tier team, but they were able to be competitive with Texas for 3 quarters. Is there a world in which they do that today against the Dawgs?
Yeah, certainly. I think you've seen this season the margin of error has been reduced because of the transfer portal, and we've seen teams before come out, find ways to slow the game down, make it into a 4-quarter game. I think they're going to try and do that with their running quarterback, Michael Van Buren, there. And while they do traditionally play with tempo, I think there's a little bit of a blueprint right now on how to muck the game up a little bit. Auburn was able to do that a week ago, only 4 first-half possessions for Georgia. Kentucky obviously had much better success with that overall. And so in this game, it'll be interesting. Mississippi State wants to traditionally play faster, but I think if they go out and try and slow it down, Georgia has shown that it hasn't necessarily been able to totally figure out teams in terms of blowing them out quickly. And so that just sort of leads into longer games in a world where this final number, which I believe it's coming in around 34 points, comes into the picture.
So let's talk about the Georgia offense. I've spent a lot of this show talking about how I think that the Georgia run game has to be stepped up, but also no Colby Young for this game, I believe. And so in your mind, what's more important in getting it done today, the run game or the pass game?
I'm going to take the cop-out answer and say both. I think the big thing that Georgia needs is they need explosive plays. Like they've shown, yes, they can drive the length of the field. They did that against Kentucky. They did that last week for the most part against Auburn. But, 10 plays or more, 20 yards or more, those sort of chunk plays that just make it easier to score. Those are the things that have been missing from this Georgia offense. Georgia ranked first in the country last year of plays 10 yards or more. They currently rank 40th in the country in that statistic right now. So that's an area in particular where Georgia needs to do a better job, both being explosive in the run game and the pass game. I think we've seen a little bit more flashes of that in the run game with Trevor Etienne. Sure, he hasn't had a long home run yet, so to speak, but I think he's done enough there. Maybe you get Nate Frazier a little bit more involved in that aspect as well today, and that's where it comes in the run game. As far as the pass game, maybe this is a game where Anthony Evans and his speed shows up. They try and get Arian Smith to take some deep shots. I think that's an area where maybe you go out and see this Georgia offense be more explosive. I think that's the number one goal today. It's not the running game or the passing game, but can Georgia manufacture explosive plays in this game and get a win?
Yeah, I do think this is a game where you can try out different things, but when all is said and done, what's the biggest thing you want to see out of the Dawgs today?
I think get in and get out with a win. They have a huge game next week against Texas, and quite frankly, this Mississippi State team is not SEC quality. So I don't know how much Georgia needs to work on things. I think this is a game where they love to get up big early and build some depth with some of the younger players that they have behind them. But at the end of the day, this is a game, just get in with a win, get out with a win, and then you have that big game next week against Texas that is obviously going to have a ton of attention.
All right, thanks, Connor.
Yep, bye.
And as always, you can check out myself and Connor Riley on DawgNation at Large every Thursday at 7 o'clock. Like Connor said, you got to get out. You've got to get out of this game as healthy as possible. Georgia's just now getting to the point where they're starting to get those players back, specifically when it comes to the defensive line, who hasn't had a full staff all season long. You want to remain healthy. You want to get out of this game, but you also want to let your younger players get some of that crucial playing time, especially maybe some of those sophomores that we haven't got to see as much. So that's what I'm looking for out of today's game. Look, don't overlook the opponent. You can't in this day and age. Do as Kirby Smart would do. Focus on what's right in front of you. Keep feet planted, but get a little rowdy while doing it. This is DawgNation Game Day.
Doing a Netflix documentary on you this week. Who would you want to watch it? And would they like approve? Would you send it to your parents? Would you send it to an NFL team if they did a Netflix documentary on your performance and your pride and how you practice this week?